All right, so Heidegger, part two. So this type of knowledge, this epiphany experience thing, is a type of knowledge known as aletheia. Aletheia, or revealed knowledge. Again, think about Heidegger's Christian background here. The last book of the Christian Bible is the book of Revelation, right? That this whole experience with God is meant to be a fully experienced thing, a fully immersed, practical, changing your life here and now thing, not just an intellectual understanding. Oh yes, Christian God, how nice. No. It's meant to change things, right? It's meant to give you a more authentic way of being, right? Living for something other than yourself, so on and so forth. My sister-in-law, so my wife's sister, shortly after college, kind of didn't know what she wanted to do with life, right? She had her degree in music and in business. She liked music. Business was very practical, very bright, but just didn't really have direction. And so she was like, I feel like I need to be part of something bigger than myself. And so the two things that were at the top of the list under consideration for being a part of something bigger, right? Finding fulfillment and meaning in things beyond just yourself. Probably pretty authentic, right? The two ways that she could think to do that were a convent, right? Devoting your entire life to following God, or the military. Now, both of those places, it's very interesting. I'm sort of laying the groundwork for Jean-Paul Sartre, whom I'll talk about next time, who wants to talk about freedom is a thing that we think we want until we actually have it. What's interesting about the military and the convent is you don't have to do a lot of thinking about the mundane stuff, right? You can think about bigger, larger issue things because the day-to-day is taken care of, right? I think about the scene from Forrest Gump where he takes the gun apart and cleans it and puts it back together or whatever. And the CEO, the commanding officer, asks him, how'd you do it so fast? And he says, 'cause you told me to. Right? There's not a lot of questions asked in the military. You do what your CO tells you to do because they told you to do it. It frees up your mind for thinking about other stuff. My advisor for my dissertation, when he was in graduate school, worked at a lumber yard. He said it was great because he could physically be working on, cutting lumber or whatever, fairly mindless. I mean, you have to be mindful enough not to chop off fingers and stuff, but I mean, you kind of get in a routine. And so while he was physically doing this and getting paid, mentally he was free to write his stories, write his essays and so forth for class, be thinking about other things, be thinking about these abstract concepts like existence, thinking authentically, even while making some money. Sounds pretty good to me. So this authentic way of being with others, but also an authentic way of being in the world. In order to tell this story, I got to back up a little bit for Heidegger. Heidegger wants to talk about thrownness or fallenness. That we, all of us, are simply thrown into a world. This world is already ongoing. This world already has stuff happening. It already has ongoing projects. Right? Your family, if they have issues, had issues before you were on the scene. And you were just kind of thrust into that. You didn't ask for it. You didn't say, oh man, I hope to go to a family with issues. Yeah. No. You didn't get a choice. You were just thrown into it. Here you go. Boom. Figure it out. Welcome to life. We're thrown into it, and then we got to figure it out. There was an old television show, early 80s, I think, called Greatest American Hero. And here's the setup for the show. A high school teacher, already great setup, is thrust into a situation that he doesn't know the answers to. He finds a superhero costume that has all of these powers, but it doesn't come with an instruction manual. He doesn't know how to use the thing. Every episode is him trying to figure it out. And it's great because he's a high school teacher. Teachers are supposed to know things. And here's some things he doesn't know that he's trying to figure out. Right? Just like the students are trying to figure out the things that he's teaching them, right? Welcome to life itself. Even the experts are still working on trying to figure it out. And this is ongoing. It's an ing. Learn ing, teach ing, be ing. And all of this stuff is ongoing. And so he's trying to figure it out. And so every episode is like, whoa, it does that? Huh. Know more now than I did before. Still don't know it all yet. He's just thrown into it, right? He ran across it. Maybe it chose him, whatever. That's a whole nother thing. Right? Or the great character Spider-Man. Right? Spider-Man's an awkward teenage nerd who suddenly has these spider powers. Good luck. Spider-Man would love to give it up. He has multiple times throughout the comic run, throughout the mythos and the story of Spider-Man. He's given it up many times. You know what? I can't do it. I'm done. I just want to live a normal life. And he keeps coming back. Great power comes great responsibility, right? With this power to think critically about these things, with this power to have this relationship to the concept of being, perhaps then we also have a responsibility to think about the concept of being. Stanley, very underrated as a philosopher. I might write that book one day too. So we're thrown into this world. Here again, think about the Christian underpinnings. In the beginning of the Christian story, Adam and Eve are communing with God. Everything's great. Then they make a mistake. They do the one thing God told them not to do. Then they get thrown out of Eden. Thrown out of paradise. Thrown. Now, what's great about this idea of thrownness is the disorientation that comes with it. They weren't asked to leave. God wasn't like, well, Adam and Eve, I'd really appreciate if you guys could leave paradise now. No. They were thrown against their will, just like when you get thrown into your family stuff, thrown into the ongoing world stuff. You didn't ask for it, you were just thrown into it. Here you go. And so there's this disorientation. Think about a ball that's being thrown. When you throw a ball, that was actually a pretty good form. You throw a ball, the ball's just in the air, man. The ball didn't ask to be thrown. The ball doesn't know where it's landing. The ball's just in the air like, whoa, what is going on here? That's like us. We're the ball that is thrown. Here again, an object which is thrown is called a projectile. Again, projects. You're thrown into projects, ongoing stuff. You then become a part of those ongoing things, and you undertake certain projects. You throw yourself into the future once you have certain choices and so forth, right? So you start off, you're just very disoriented, and then throughout life, you begin to sort of direct your own ball path, but you just don't know where you're gonna land. And it's gonna end, that's death. You're gonna land somewhere in some time, but you don't know when. But you project yourself into the future. We're necessarily future-oriented things, right? We think about, oh, well, tomorrow when this thing happens, next week when this other thing happens, right? And if we stop doing that, some have suggested, and I think Heidegger would agree here, you're already dead. If you make no future plans of any kind, you're already dead. Emotionally, spiritually, all that stuff. Your body maybe hasn't caught up yet, but you've already given up. Like, I have no future, blah, blah, blah. Right? And so think about the two primary ways of responding to a diagnosis of a terminal disease, and given a certain time frame. You have 6 months left to live or something along those lines, 6 to 9 months. Some folks will then, that's the opportunity to really start living. This awareness of their own death and how soon it is, how close they, the ball, are to the ground is the time to, whoa, I really got to make some headway now. I'm going to take all those trips I never got around to. I'm going to talk to all those people I never got around to. Or I'm going to write that great American novel I never got around to. I'm going to do all the things I never got around to because there's not a lot of around to left to get to. Frequently, those folks outlive the 6 to 9 month prognosis. They're projecting themselves into the future, undergoing more projects, doing more things, living life. The other response, I've only got 6 to 9 months. Why bother doing anything? And very rarely do they even make it to the 6-month mark. They've already decided they're dead. Their body just takes a few months to catch up. They're not projecting themselves into the future. There is no future. They're not future oriented anymore. We undergo projects. As goofy as it is, I think about sports or something along those lines. Sports is a nice, not serious way of getting to serious issues sometimes. So, during the football season, right? ESPN happens to have Monday Night Football. And so they'll start showing ads on Tuesday. Is it Monday yet? Is it Monday yet? Is it Monday yet? Now, you could wish your life away that way, always looking forward to something else, never really living in the present. But they're also getting to this future-oriented thing. Look, there's something to look forward to. Right, we'll at least have football next Monday. Yeah, it's only Tuesday. If you can just get through 6 more days, we'll have football on Monday night again. Right? There's something about the future. Or movie trailers, right? This movie's not out yet, but in the future, right? Get excited, get ready, get prepared for it. In the future, in the future, in the future. We're future-oriented things. Right? The other way he talks about this thrownness, as he calls it, fallenness. Again, the Christian underpinnings, the fall of mankind. Sin enters the world and so on and so forth. They get thrown out of Eden. Fall, and again, falling and thrown both have these disorienting things, trying to figure things out as you go, on the fly, as they say, trying to figure it out. And so if I'm trying to figure this thing out and I'm disoriented, and you're trying to figure this thing out and you're disoriented, that's why it makes more sense to work together. This authentic way of being with others. And so we're thrown into this world with ongoing stuff, and there's, again, an authentic way of being in the world and an inauthentic way of being in the world. This goes back to the shoe thing, too. And again, the Christian distinction talks about being in the world versus being of the world. Okay? So the inauthentic way of being in the world would be being of the world. Where you do what everyone else does just because they do it. You're chasing earthly treasures and so on and so forth. The being in the world, you're living authentically for something else, God instead of the meaning of being, but same idea here, generally speaking. Living for something else, living for others, trying to help others, and this is specifically Jesuit. Most Catholic universities are Jesuit, and they emphasize education and service. Education for self, service to others. Once you become educated, you can live more authentically, and you can authentically be with others by serving them and so forth, and allowing them that freedom to disclose the meaning of being for themselves, so on and so forth. So again, that's still there too. The thinking and the serving. So of the world versus in the world. Even once you're living authentically, you're still in the world. There's still stuff ongoing. Right? You're just focusing on different things at that point. Which then brings us to being unto death. It's not the fact that we will die that makes us unique. It's the fact that we are aware that we will die that makes us unique, says Heidegger. Our own finitude is a major aspect of the human condition. So much so that even some people call them futurists, others call them transhumanists, some call them post-humanists. They're the people who presume that we will overcome and defeat death, that we will become immortal. We won't be humans anymore. We'll be something else. Post-human, transhuman, will be something else. The human condition is one of death and one of one's awareness of death. And think about how differently this impacts you based upon your own experience with others' death. How young were you when you first understood death? How old was the person who died, right? Was it your great-grandmother who had lived a full life, and this is just the end? Or is this a school chum from elementary school who's your age, 6, 7, 8, who's now dead, who hasn't lived that full life yet, and yet it's over anyway? Those impact you very differently in your understanding and your concept of death, and therefore your concept of life also. Life is fleeting, gotta make the most of it. Life is fleeting, so why bother with any of it? Very different ways of understanding these things. And all of those ways of understanding are aspects of the concept of existence itself. Those are all part of the answer to the question of meaning of being. Heidegger says, look, this fact that we will die and that we are aware that we will die should be the impetus for life. Because we don't know when we're going to land, when this thrownness and fallenness will end, when we're going to hit the ground, that's why we need to live as authentically and as much as possible in the interim. If we never died, we wouldn't actually live. I think about gravestones, right? Life is the hyphen. Born, hyphen, died. All of life, everything, is the hyphen. That's crazy. All of your accomplishments, all of your achievements, all of everything summed up by a hyphen. And yet, that hyphen is of utmost importance while you're living it. And so we'll talk some of the ramifications of Heideggerian thinking, Susan Wolf and some others, right? This idea of a meaningful life in spite of death versus because of death. Death is wild, man. And Heidegger's writing about it because he just saw it everywhere. He just saw it a decade earlier everywhere in the continent of Europe, especially Germany. So it would be irresponsible to not emphasize the concept of death, thinks Heidegger. What's also interesting is, given the time period and given what Heidegger's talking about and this idea of plop and so on and so forth, and these Buddhist underpinnings as well as this Christian thing going on, there were Buddhist scholars, Keiji Nishitani specifically, who came to Germany to study with Martin Heidegger, which then, brought Heidegger more in the fold of Buddhism. And so it's interesting, this trajectory between Schopenhauer, who had a particular understanding of Buddhism, up to Heidegger, who has a completely different understanding of Buddhism, because he's actually talking to practicing Buddhists like Keiji Nishitani. And so in Nishitani's work, then, we see this sort of Germanizing of Buddhism. And so Buddhism and German thinking kind of become intertwined here in some ways. And so it's interesting that intellectually and philosophically, Japan and Germany are coming together just a few years before they become aligned politically, right, with World War II and so forth. Yeah, I lost my train of thought, sorry. All right, so we also need to get to this ready to hand, present at hand distinction. And this has to do with some of this equipment stuff that he's talking about. Okay. Oh, one more thing, this ongoing thing, this ing. Other times in his writing, he'll write it like this. Being crossed out. Not erased, but crossed out, which is to say that previous versions of ourselves are still there, but they're crossed out. We take aspects of them into the future with us. We also leave other aspects behind. We do grow, we mature, we develop, so on and so forth. So every time we think we know who we are, it actually gets crossed out because we've already moved on beyond that to the next point. And this crossing out then will also pertain to the ready to hand, present at hand. This is, he talks about concern, the German word Sorge here, concern for others on page 117. Talks about these clues to being found in the everyday, also on 117. Possibilities to be or not to be, the Hamlet question, right? There again, to be authentic or be inauthentic, but also just to continue existence or not. Those are both possibilities. This projectile thing is full of possibilities. To be, to not be, to continue to be thrown, or to fall on the ground. Either of those is just as possible as the other. And that should impact and change how you then go about living life now. Sorry, just on 117, there's so many other things here. This is so rich and so full of stuff here. And again, I'm spending a lot of time on Heidegger because I think that he really does lay the groundwork for where we are right now, philosophically speaking. One of my professors said that contemporary philosophy goes through Heidegger, not around Heidegger. Okay? And those are the main philosophers that I'm choosing to focus on in this course. Are the ones that are influential, not just in their time, but for where we are now. Okay? Where he talks about being disclosed, top of page 117. I've already mentioned this, but I just want to tie it back to the text so you can see I'm not making this stuff up. We cannot define Dasein's essence by citing a what of the kind that pertains to a subject matter, right? It's not something we can point to. We can't point to the definition of being. It's a lived thing instead. It's not a what, it's a how or a why, which is very different. And because essence lies rather in the fact that in each case it has its being to be and has as its own, right? So again, I can't define it specifically for everyone because everyone's going to be slightly different. What I can do is give, if I'm Heidegger, is give certain universal conditions that everyone needs. Then from there's going to be specifics that are going to be particular to each person and particular to each person at different points in their life, the being that gets crossed out. And this crossing out thing is a fascinating idea. Let's go back to the concept of love. And so my wife, through her work and so forth, in many ways tries to get people to cross out their previous understandings of love, right? If it is something like abuse, right? So you have this idea of what love is, and through therapy and so forth, you realize, oh wait, that wasn't really love after all. Those experiences don't get erased, they get crossed out and experienced as something that at the time you thought was love, but now realize it's not. That's what crossing out does, is it changes the way that you understand it now. It doesn't erase it. Erasing it would be like having your memory wiped. It just didn't happen. No, it happened. And it happened a certain way. You're just now interpreting what happened differently as thing that you thought was love, but actually isn't. And we'll talk, and that's going to pertain to this ready-to-hand, present-hand thing as well when we get there, if Schrappe ever shuts up about this other stuff. Yeah, all right, so let's get there. This is bottom of 118 then. He's talking about equipment. Okay? And again, we're only getting part of the story because this is an excerpt. Okay? We shall call those entities which we encounter in concern equipment. Okay, now this is a different type of concern. The equipment he's talking about here are objects, actual things out there. Now, he's writing post-Freud, so we can read some subjective relationships in here as well, but he's specifically talking here about subject-object relationships, equipment, things out there. How do we approach them? How do we interact with them? In our dealings, we come across equipment for writing, sewing, working, transportation, measurement, so on and so forth, right? Specific equipment for specific things, for our usage. So our concern for these things is really concern for how can I use this thing for my purpose. But before you understand what the thing is and how you can use it, it's just a thing out there. It's a thing that is presented to you. It is present out there and presented to you as a thing. It's present at hand. The best analogy I can come up with here, if any of you played a sport that required equipment other than a ball. So, for example, and even some ball sports, so basketball with the shoes, for instance, or a tennis racket, golf clubs, baseball bats, something along those lines, hockey sticks. Some piece of equipment which you use as an extension of yourself. When you first are deciding which one of these sticks you're going to use, which one will best, and see, it's going to sound goofy and poetic and abstract if you're not familiar with these types of things, but it's going to be which one of these hundreds of, we'll go with baseball bats. Baseball bats is the best one for me. The best baseball bat may not be the best baseball bat for me. Actually, I'll use tennis rackets because I played tennis and I play baseball. The best tennis racket may not be the best tennis racket for me. There are eccentricities, there are individualities, there are particulars amongst every one of these hundreds of tennis rackets. I gotta find the one that's right for me. So I go to the store and all of these are presented. All of these are present. I then have to pick them up, swing them. Again, here's where the goofy poetic thing comes in. Begin a relationship with them. It's sort of like speed dating, I think. My wife won't let me speed date, though I'm fascinated by the concept. It's sort of like speed dating. You pick it up, no, not right. Nah. Like there's a certain feel, and again, it can't be articulated. It's an experiential thing. You pick the thing up and it just feels different. Right, so you have it narrowed down to 4 or 5 that feel different. Then you start swinging them a little bit. Like, ooh, this one's a little too heavy. This one's a little too light. This one just doesn't feel right. This relationship isn't working. I don't need a second date. But there's going to be a piece of equipment, a tennis racket, that feels right to you. And so you enter into a relationship with it, and you buy it, you take it home, it's the one that you play with, right? You build intimacy with it, right? You become more familiar with it, to the point where it's no longer a racket, it really is an extension of you. You don't say your racket hits the ball, you say you hit the ball, because the racket is an extension of your arm. And you know if there's a bunch of rackets that are all very similar, you know which one's yours. You know if you pick up the wrong one. I could throw 20 tennis rackets into a pile, blindfold you, and you would know which one's yours, because you have that intimacy with it, right? I could line up 20 people, right, or have them sit down or something, and blindfold you. And you would know, not based on voice, not based on smell, but based upon the conversation that you have with them, which one's your significant other. You just know, because you have this intimacy, you have this relationship. Here's where that could be a bad thing, though. They're now ready to hand, right? You go, you grab the racket, boom, it's ready. Boom, it's ready. Boom, it's ready. Your relationship to it has changed. You now take it for granted. It's no longer presented to you as a separate entity. It is an extension of you. Right? Sometimes relationships end up like this as well. Right? You no longer have to call every Friday night for a date. It's expected. You know they're going to be available, and you're available because you know every Friday night you go out. You've been going steady, to use a 1950s phrase. I don't know what people call it nowadays. Right? You're an item. You're a relationship. And so there are certain things that you take for granted. They may not be their own person. You see them as an extension of you. There are certain expectations here, just like with your tennis racket. They're ready to hand until something breaks. Now, typically we see things as breaking. Heidegger's term here is rupture. A break in the relationship or a rupture in the relationship, something has gone wrong, as a bad thing. This is actually an opportunity. Again, those dentist office posters, right? um, problems are merely opportunities. Things aren't going to get better unless they're broken first. Right? Because if it's not broken, you're not going to work on fixing it. Right? And so you think everything's fine until the string on the racket breaks. You're like, shoot. Or musical instruments are this way as well, right? A guitar, right? Everything's fine, then a string breaks. Now what? There's a great video footage of Stevie Ray Vaughan, a great guitarist, kind of blues rock, on Austin City Limits from the early 80s, where in the midst of a song, one of his strings breaks. And what's amazing is he continues to play the song without that string. So then what's happening is, extremely quickly, he's having to figure out, in the midst of the song, wait, how else can I play these notes that I would normally play on the string that is no longer there? It's fantastic. It's fantastic, and he's gifted enough that he can do that. A schmuck like me would be like, nope, string's broken, sorry, stop the song. Stop the taping, stop the song. I'll grab another guitar here. Right? Your string breaks, now you gotta figure out something else. Or the frame is bent, or something goes wrong. Or in interpersonal relationships, he or she says to you, we need to talk. Something's not quite right, something's off, you've taken me for granted, you don't woo me anymore, something along those lines. Like, whoa. Typically these brokenness and this rupturing is unexpected, right? It's difficult to expect a break, to expect a rupture. But now, once the thing is broken, it can be presented to you again, differently. Right? A new getting to know you stage can develop and occur. One where you don't take them for granted, you allow them to be. Because people are not equipment like tennis rackets. Though I've been speaking of them kind of slurly. And here's where it gets really goofy. Sometimes things are more present to your consciousness when they're no longer present in existence. Most of you are probably too young for this one to make sense, but the Twin Towers in New York, for instance. I never really thought about them. Most people didn't. They were there. We took them for granted. If we go to New York, we can see them if we want to. Great. Until September 12th of that year. They're gone. They no longer exist. They are not there. They are no longer present. But their lack of presence out there makes them more present here. They're on the thoughts and minds of, people that never thought about them before that. But to make it much more practical, think about if you live near trees. Okay? This tree right here. I don't really notice this tree that much. Drive by it, walk by it, whatever. Yeah, it's a tree, great. It's absent from my mind because it's present in existence. But if I walked by tomorrow and this tree is gone, I'll know something is off, something is missing. I may not be able to picture the tree exactly in my mind, but something's not quite right over there. And then it'll come to me, oh right, there was that tree. Right, the tree that I had ignored, that I'd taken for granted, that was absent in my mind because it was present out there, now has to be present here because it's absent out there. Or a relationship, right? Think about the death of a loved one. You took for granted that you could call them up and talk to them, and now you can't. And you probably think about them more now than you did when you could call them up. A less depressing example, close to where I live close to the intersection of Cleveland Avenue and Ennis Road, okay? Northern Lights area. So if you're familiar with Columbus, you know where that is. If you're not familiar with Columbus, it's okay. The rest of the example will still work. On Cleveland Avenue, right across from Northern Lights Shopping Center, my entire life growing up, I can remember there being a Taco Bell there. Took it for granted. I know there's Taco Bell there. I know if I want Taco Bell, I can go there. Boom, done. Great. Then a few years ago, they tore down the Taco Bell. Fine. But they put up a sign, coming soon, Taco Bell. Coming soon? Wait a minute. I thought I knew that there was a Taco Bell there all along. But had there always been a Taco Bell there, And now that's been torn down, the sign would then say coming back soon or returning soon, not coming soon. Coming soon indicates it was never here to begin with. We're coming for the first time. So then I really had to think consciously, wait, was there actually a Taco Bell there? Did I actually know the thing that I thought I knew? I had to bring it to the forefront of my mind. I had to bring it to consciousness, awareness. Be present here because it was absent out there. The Taco Bell had been crossed out. Present, absence. Crazy ideas that Schrappe at least thinks have much farther reaching implications. But again, this isn't a class on Schrappe philosophy, so if and when I ever write a book, you can read about it then if you still care. Okay? That's the present at hand, ready to hand distinction. See, there's other stuff here in the excerpt that we need to cover. Yeah. Hammering. He likes hammers. It's appropriate this equipment in a way which could not possibly be more suitable, right? So equipment, things. In dealing such as this, where something is put to use, our concern subordinates itself to the in order to, which constitutes for the equipment we are employing at the time. The less we just stare at the hammer thing, the more we seize hold of it and use it, the more primordial does our relationship to it become. The more unveiledly it is encountered as that which it is as equipment. That's different when we're talking about people. Right? Let's see. Heidegger, he kind of throws these ideas out there, sort of ties them together loosely, doesn't precisely define stuff, in part because he thinks that he can't, being is not that type of a thing. But also because he's more drawn towards imagery and so forth instead, right? The plop of the frog. Really drawn to poetry. He loves poets, right? Who are just kind of painting pictures, images for you to experience. And Heidegger, as I said, kind of lays the groundwork for 21st century philosophy as well. But there's an important aspect of Heidegger's life that has to be brought to the forefront as well. And it matters because, remember, for Heidegger, if he's asking the question, the meaning of being, part of the answer to that is how it is that you're being, how you're existing, how you're living. So here again, just like Montaigne does, Heidegger is specifically tying philosophy to biography. Life and thought are one and the same thing. Which is why it matters that Heidegger was literally a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party. Now, that does not necessarily mean all of this is garbage. It may mean that he himself did not follow this. That doesn't mean it's garbage. That's a fallacy we'll talk about in a few weeks. It may be that he was having moments of inauthenticity. It's also unclear exactly how aware he was of the final solution. He was at least still a member, and if and when he ever stopped being a member of the Nazi Party. It's not like you go out and you burn your card, hey, I'm done with you guys. And he was aware at least that things were not going to go well for Jewish people. His philosophical mentor, Edmund Husserl, whom I referenced in the last video, was Jewish. He kind of gave Husserl a heads up, hey, you may want to get out of town. But here's where the story becomes really complicated. He never apologized for it. He never apologized for being a Nazi, which was really difficult for some of his colleagues and friends who happened to be Jewish after World War II. Emmanuel Levinas was prominent of these. Levinas was like, how about an I'm sorry for that whole thing. And Heidegger never apologized. Now, part of this could be in keeping with his philosophy. As a previous version of Martin, why should this current version of Martin apologize for something the other Martin did? Like for apologizing for something some other person did. Okay, maybe. But at the same time, that is still you. There is still aspects of this previous you that are through today. Couldn't you apologize on behalf of that aspect of Martin? Which, notice here with this crossing out of being and this ongoing development thing, we're thrust right back into the first thought experiment for the class, the ship of Theseus. Are there aspects of the boat which persist through all of the changes? Some of you said yes, others said no. And I used a boat specifically because, again, we do give personality. We assign a name. And so there are parallels with ourselves. Are there aspects of us which persist through all of the changes that we undergo? Or are we completely different things at age 42 than we are at age 22, than we are at age 2? If we're completely different things, then why do we call ourselves the same thing? Although we do sometimes change our names, especially when we undergo certain changes. For example, when I get, the handshake, hey, you're in the club of doctorates. I then get extra letters, PhD. I'm now Dr. Schrappe instead of Mr. Schrappe, or David, or something along those lines. If when you become a parent, father, mother, daddy, something along those lines, you get a new name. If you go through a rite of passage in certain religious traditions or other types of traditions, right? You may get a new name, right? This is your initiation into adulthood. You're a man now or a woman now, and with that comes a new name. Nicknames that may or may not fit anymore, because that's not who you are anymore, right? My brother-in-law, so my wife's brother, his name is Donald. That's the name on his birth certificate. But when he was born, nobody called him Donald because he's a baby, and it felt weird and awkward apparently for people to call a baby Donald, so they called him Donnie. And that was fine until he started getting into the teenage years, and then he began to call himself Don, not Donnie. I'm not Donnie anymore. That's the little kid me. I'm now Don. So that's how he would introduce himself to others. Get a little bit older, get married, have kids, join the military, so forth. Now he's Donald. What's interesting is sometimes that doesn't translate with other folks. His mother still calls him Donnie. And so, guess how she also continues to treat him? Like a little kid, like Donnie, instead of Don or Donald, which then really confuses his kids, because they don't know who's in charge. Is it grandma, because dad's acting like a little kid, or is it dad, because he's dad? Going through this right now in my own home. I haven't chosen the name change, but my children have chosen to call me something different, which is reflective of their change, not mine. My son now started calling me Dad instead of Daddy. My name has changed for him because he's changed. He's different enough now that he thinks he should call me something else. He's not a little kid anymore. Maybe he's a preteen or teen or whatever you want to call him. So I'm Dad instead of Daddy. Names are very, very interesting things. And what is it that they encapsulate? What do they consist of? What are they shorthand for? And so think not just about what you call yourself, but think about what your friends call you, and what your family call you, what your employer calls you, what your kids call you, what other people in your life call you, and what that has to say about the relationship that you have with them, and perhaps when that relationship began, and how far, if at all, that relationship has come and evolved and changed. Names are interesting things. Schrappe at least thinks. Schrappe thinks names are so interesting and so important. Dr. Schrappe and Mrs. Schrappe for all three of our children, waited until we met them, waited until they were born to choose names. And it took hours and hours and hours. Our daughter, our firstborn, was baby girl for 12 hours. That's how long it took us to pick out a name for her. Our son was born on New Year's Eve. We're going through baby name books as the ball is dropping, thinking, that's not right either. No. Even after we'd chosen one and told the hospital the one that we'd chosen, here's the one that goes in the birth certificate, we're walking around the hospital with him, pushing him around in a little thing. Not the whole hospital, the maternity ward, getting some exercise and so forth. And we're like, what if we change our mind? We still weren't sure we'd chosen the right name. Because on one hand, a name should reflect who the person is, but on the other hand, at that early of a stage, a name could define who that person is. Especially if you name them after someone. Oh. Now you're saying they're in the lineage of. And of course, this is one of the ways last names began. Right? So-and-so's son, or so-and-so's daughter. Right? This is the family name. This is who you are. This connection with history. Go back to Heidegger. These ongoing projects that you're necessarily a part of because you were thrown into this family or fallen into this family. Traditionally, at least, back in the day, not so much anymore, people would change their names when they got married. I'm part of a new clan now, a new tribe now. These are the projects I've chosen to undertake and be a part of. And recently, at least, I know of a couple of couples who are both hyphenating their names. They're neither one losing or getting rid of. They're adding on to. So it's their last name plus their new spouse's last name. It's very interesting, different cultures around the world, how people introduce themselves. They introduce themselves, is their first name the family name or the individual name? First name. In the United States, the first name is the individual name. The family name is second. Other cultures, the family name is first. To give you context, this is the history I'm coming from, the family that I'm a part of. That is prioritized. Secondly, then, is the individual stuff. My own name. Meh. Not as important as the family name. Not as important as the family I'm a member of. These are interesting. And are there things that persist? Or should I be changing my name quite frequently? Because I'm growing, changing, maturing. I don't know. So next time then I'll move on to where some of these Heideggerian thoughts lead into later into the 20th century and even somewhat into the 21st century.